I just faced the worst Karen ever. This woman turned an ordinary flight into her personal stage, trying to bully her way past the crew and into the cockpit. Her excuse? I don't need rules, I'm too important. What she didn't know was that I was the air marshal on board, and her little stunt was about to earn her a pair of handcuffs. But let me start at the beginning. Before we dive in, let me know where you're listening from today. The air inside LAX was thick and stale, a mix of cleaning solution, jet fuel, and quiet frustration. I sat in a worn chair near Gate 72B, another ghost waiting for another red-eye. Hoodie up, sunglasses on, even though the sun had disappeared hours ago. To everyone else, I was just Fred Monk, a tired consultant heading back to Denver. In reality, I was Federal Air Marshal Fred Monk, responsible for making sure this metal tube full of strangers landed in one piece. This route had been flagged, not for anything major, just a pattern of passenger incidents and mid-flight disruptions. A statistical ripple that meant someone like me had to babysit the flight. Usually it was nothing, just a drunk salesman or a couple fighting over an armrest. You watch, you wait, and you become part of the background. My friend Dave thinks my job is pure adrenaline. He's a high school teacher who finds excitement in grading essays on the Louisiana Purchase. He doesn't get it. The hardest part isn't the danger, it's the quiet. It wears you down. And then the quiet ended. Her name, I'd learn later, was Karen Tillman. But you didn't need a name to recognize the type. She stormed through the gate area like a low-pressure system, sucking the calm right out of the room. Her voice was sharp and loud enough to command attention. She held her phone on a pink, jewel-encrusted gimbal, live streaming her outrage. "You will not believe the incompetence at the check-in counter," she said to her invisible audience. "They dared to weigh my carry-on." As if I don't know the rules, I'm a million-mile flyer. A few passengers glanced up, annoyed, then quickly looked away. Nobody wants to lock eyes with a storm. An older man across from me muttered, "Is she rehearsing?" I replied, "Off-Broadway." "Very off," he chuckled. "Hope it's a short show." "Depends on the audience," I said. And right on cue, phones were up. She was a caricature, but a dangerous one. People like her think rules are insults and everyone else is background noise, my uncle used to say. Some people walk through life like they're the only ones with a script. Karen was the writer, director, and star of her own terrible movie, and we were all unpaid extras. The gate agent announced Group 1. Karen, of course, shoved her way forward, flashing her boarding pass like royalty. She cut off an elderly couple, dragging her rolling bag behind her like a battering ram. I waited for Group 2. My process never changes. Blend in, observe, stay invisible. Just another man in a gray hoodie. Once aboard, I caught that familiar scent of recycled air and faint disinfectant. The flight attendants greeted us with tired smiles. Karen was already in seat 1C, first row aisle, still recording. She was scolding a flight attendant for not serving a pre-departure drink. "What's the point of status if there's no service?" she barked. My seat was 2A aisle, directly behind her across the narrow walkway. The perfect vantage point. As I passed, my duffel barely brushed the air near her shoulder. Her head snapped around. She scanned me, hoodie, jeans, sneakers, and sneered. "Loud enough for the whole cabin," she said. "Oh, great. People like you don't usually sit in first class. I hope you know how to behave." The elderly woman she'd cut earlier leaned over. "Honey, he looks cleaner than your soul," she whispered. Her husband added, "And he's got better shoes." I didn't react, though inside I wanted to laugh. My job wasn't to clap back, it was to stay gray, invisible, forgettable. I just met Karen's glare for one flat second, then sat down and buckled in. The same question always creeps in during moments like that. What makes someone think they're untouchable? Money, status? Followers? She believed she was above consequence, completely unaware of who was sitting behind her. The plane door hadn't even closed, and she was already the most volatile person on board. She was the spark. I was the extinguisher, with a badge and better timing. The soft chime of the flight attendant call rang. Leah, the purser, moved down the aisle with calm precision. She'd worked this route for years. Reliable, steady, exactly the kind of person you want when things go sideways. She stopped at my row, angled slightly toward me and said, "Mr. Monk, can I get you a pre-departure water? Still or sparkling?" That was the signal, a quiet confirmation. It wasn't in any manual, but air marshals and veteran crew knew the code. "Still is fine," I said evenly. "Long day?" Her eyebrow ticked up a fraction. "Message received." Right away, she said, disappearing into the galley. The word still confirmed I was the air marshal on duty. From that moment, she and I shared a silent contract. Keep this flight safe. I pulled out my phone, pretending to read while mentally mapping the cabin. My seat 2A aisle was perfect. From there, I had a clear view of the cockpit door galley and anyone moving through that space. One row back from the problem, close enough to act fast but not draw suspicion. Every flight is a puzzle. My job is to solve it before it breaks apart. A big man with a military haircut in 3D looked alert, an asset. Across from him, a nervous man kept glancing at Karen, probably her companion, a liability. The young flight attendant she'd yelled at was flustered and scared. Another weak link. This is what most people don't understand about my work. It's not about weapons or fights, it's about people. You build a mental chart of assets, threats, and pressure points. Dave once told me that teaching entitled teenagers is about finding their leverage, the one thing they care about more than their ego. For Karen, that was her audience. The people watching her live stream. The same followers who made her feel untouchable were her biggest weakness. If this flight went sideways, I already knew how I'd handle it, quietly, efficiently. And when the time came, she'd learn exactly how far too important really gets you, especially at 35,000 feet. The cabin was a chessboard. I already knew where the king sat behind the reinforced door at the front. I knew who the queen was, the loud, disruptive woman in row 1. I had identified my knight, the steady ex-military man in 3D, and a potential pawn in the nervous man in 3C. Leah was my rook, controlling the board from the galley. The game had not started yet. We were still on the ground, a fragile illusion of civility holding strong, but we would be taking off soon. At 35,000 feet, the rules change. The board shrinks. There are no easy exits. I had my mental map. I had my assets and liabilities cataloged. And I had one very loud, very predictable problem in 1C, a woman who believed her own hype. The pre-flight announcements began, the familiar drone of safety instructions most people ignore. I listened to every word. The real test would not be on the ground. It would be up there in the thin, cold air where help is minutes away, and trouble is a heartbeat from your door. The jet bridge pulled away with a low creak and the plane began its slow pushback. This was the first major transition. The moment we moved from being part of a building to a self-contained vessel. It changes everyone on board, but especially someone like Karen. On the ground, she could be removed. Once the door closed and we were under federal jurisdiction, the power dynamic shifted. She seemed to understand this and it made her bolder. As we taxied, she unbuckled and stood, reaching for the overhead bin. "Excuse me, ma'am," Leah said, appearing at her side. "You must be seated with your seatbelt fastened for taxi takeoff and landing." Karen waved a dismissive hand without looking up. She was addressing her phone, still propped on the tray and still recording. "You see this?" she told her audience. "This is the kind of power-mad nonsense you deal with. I just need my hydrating face mist. My skin gets so dry on these flights." Leah kept her voice calm but firm. "Ma'am, it's federal regulation. Please sit down and buckle up now." Karen finally turned, eyes flashing. "Do you know who I am?" she demanded. "I have over 2 million followers. One post from me and this airline stock will tank. Are you going to let me get my face missed, or do I have to make this a bigger issue?" A gate agent stepped on, issued a formal misconduct warning, and for a moment she went quiet long enough for the door to close and push back to start. This was the classic power play, testing the system for weakness, using perceived influence as a weapon against a flight attendant just doing her job. The nervous man in 3C shrank into his seat. Rory, the young flight attendant working the galley, looked terrified. Leah, however, did not flinch. She was a pro. "I know you're frustrated, ma'am, but the rules are for everyone's safety," she said. "We cannot proceed until you are seated." From my seat I watched, my body relaxing a little while my mind ran through protocols. If Karen refused, Leah would inform the captain. The captain would choose return to the gate or press on. Returning meant delays, paperwork, and maybe someone giving in to avoid trouble. I hoped this pilot would not cave. "You have to draw the line early and hard." My hand rested on my thigh, loose but ready. I would not intervene over a face mist, but I was prepared for what might come next. Leah's pleas was a courtesy. The tone was an order. Karen stared her down in a long, silent battle of wills. The engine's hum on the tarmac felt louder in that tense stillness. Finally, with a dramatic sigh for her audience, Karen slumped back. "Fine," she snapped for the whole cabin to hear. "I'll just let my skin shrivel up and die because of your ridiculous petty rules." She slammed the seatbelt into place like it was theater. Leah nodded crisply and retreated to the galley. The crisis was averted for now, but the warning remained. Karen had tested the fence and found it electrified. She now knew the purser would not be easily cowed. She would have to change tactics. The plane turned onto the active runway, engines spooled, and the pilot's voice came over the intercom, calm and confident. "Flight attendants, please be seated for takeoff." We accelerated, the cabin vibrating, and then that weightless moment as we lifted from Los Angeles into the night. We were airborne and we were a closed system. For the next few hours, the only authority that mattered was inside this aluminum tube. Karen had lost the first skirmish, but she was not done. People like her do not simply give up. They regroup and re-strategize. Her outburst was never really about face mist. It was about dominance. Failure only sharpens the need to win. As the plane climbed, I watched her tap her phone, likely crafting a narrative of victimhood for her followers. She was building her case, justifying whatever she planned to do next. The seatbelt sign pinged off and the game shifted. No more loud theatrics. Now she went sneaky. I felt the change in the cabin's energy. The opening moves were over. We were in the middle game, and I felt a cold certainty that she had only just begun. The first hour passed in deceptive calm. Beverage service started, a ritual meant to soothe nervous flyers. Karen accepted a glass of champagne like a monarch receiving tribute, inspecting the glass before sipping with exaggerated ceremony. She kept recording, narrating the subpar service and complaining about the complimentary nuts. When the cart moved on, she palmed a small silver flask and a couple of pills, dosing between takes. Not airline provisions, her own. I declined another drink and took water. Hydration and vigilance are the only things I need in the air. My attention split, one part listening to the engines and cabin rhythm, the other watching her. She was sending signals to the nervous man in 3C, not words, but glances, tiny nods, a tilt of the head. He would look at his phone, then toward her, then away. They were coordinating. This was not a solo act. A coordinated team changes the equation. As we passed over the dark Nevada desert, the plan began. A frantic string of dings from the flight attendant call button echoed from the back, rapid, insistently repeated. Rory hurried down the aisle from the forward galley. Leah followed. A moment later, a passenger and coach shouted, "Is there a doctor on board? Someone's having trouble breathing." It could be a real emergency. Medical issues happen. But the timing felt calculated. Karen did not turn. She sipped champagne with a faint, knowing smile. She knew this would happen. This was the diversion she needed. The captain's voice cut in. "We have light chop up ahead." I'm turning the seatbelt sign back on. "Please return to your seats." The turbulence increased enough to put people on edge. Leah announced a medical situation in row 28 and asked for a doctor. A passenger in row 15 responded. Leah and Rory began moving the heavy beverage cart back down the aisle to clear space. That was when Karen's partner in 3C moved. He stood, feigning the need to use the lavatory. "Sir," Leah said, voice tight, "the captain has turned on the seatbelt sign. You must stay seated." "It's an emergency," he mumbled, face pale. He pushed past and headed for the forward lavatory beside the cockpit door. At the same time, a second beverage cart was coming forward from the back. The plan became clear. The medical emergency in the rear drew crew attention and a cart. The lavatory urgency gave the nervous man a reason to be at the front. Two carts moving toward the middle would jam the aisle, trapping crew and any passengers who might help in the rear. It was simple, elegant, and dangerous. A kid in 4A tugged his mother's sleeve. "Is this like the safety video?" he asked. "It's like the part they skip," she replied. The plane jostled more insistently. The pieces were moving into place exactly as Karen had designed. I stayed seated like any annoyed passenger, but my heart rate rose and my senses sharpened. I watched the nervous man lock himself in the forward lavatory. I watched Karen take another delicate sip, the picture of casual luxury. The aisle clogged. The crew were engaged elsewhere. Passengers were strapped in and looking toward the commotion in coach. All eyes were diverted except mine. She had manufactured a pocket of controlled chaos. The fake medical was the feint. The cart jam was the trap. The cockpit door had to be the target. It always is. With the cabin's attention focused to the rear, Karen slid out of her seat clutching an empty champagne flute and moved toward the forward galley, pretending she only sought a refill. Rory had popped forward for 2 seconds and she pounced. "Refill or I'll tag you by name," she snapped. Rory glanced at Leah, swallowed, and retreated. Karen smiled like she'd just captured a pawn. She was playing a different board than the rest of us. I did not move, but my entire being was zeroed in on her. I watched her through the reflection in the dark cabin window, a warped fisheye view that distorted everything but her intent. She steadied herself against the bulkhead as the plane swayed, pretending to struggle with the turbulence, but her eyes weren't on the floor. They were scanning the galley, analyzing, calculating. Her target was small, a simple crew bag beside the purser's jump seat. Inside it were Leah's personal items and, more importantly, a service key for the galley compartments. The cockpit door, however, was a different story, secured by a reinforced keypad and deadbolt. That key wouldn't open it, but in the wrong hands it could still cause chaos. Every instinct I had screamed at me to move, to stop her before she even tried. But training is clear, wait for an overt act. Reaching for a key isn't a violation. Using it is. Move too early, and you risk escalating everything or looking like the aggressor. My job wasn't just to stop the threat. It was to do it quietly, without panic, without putting others in danger. So I waited. Watching her reflection, muscles tense, she leaned down, pretending to pick something up. Her hand flashed out like a snake, fast and practiced. Her fingers brushed the key. I was halfway out of my seat when Leah turned. Maybe it was instinct, maybe experience, but Leah sensed it. She stepped back into the galley, her tone calm but sharp. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Karen straightened, flustered but defiant. "I was just getting another glass of water," she said too quickly. I thought I dropped an earring. Leah's eyes flicked to her bag, then back to Karen. The silent truth hung between them. Leah knew exactly what Karen had been trying to do, and Karen knew she'd been caught. "The seatbelt sign is on," Leah said quietly, her voice all authority now. "Please return to your seat." For the first time I saw a crack in Karen's arrogance, a flicker of fear, or maybe just pure frustration. She glared at Leah, spun on her heel, and marched back to her seat. She sat down hard and started furiously typing on her phone. She'd failed, but she wasn't finished. The man in the forward lavatory hadn't reappeared. The aisle was still blocked. The distraction was still in play. Karen's plan had stalled, not stopped. I took a slow breath. Leah had just prevented a disaster without even realizing how close it was. She was sharp, alert, calm, and unshaken. But now Karen was exposed. Her quiet tricks had failed, and when people like her lose control, they get reckless. She couldn't get the key, so her next move would be riskier. And with her partner still near the cockpit, I knew what that meant. The pilot's voice came through the intercom, calm but serious. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been advised of unexpected severe turbulence ahead. Please remain seated with your seat belts fastened. Flight attendants, take your jump seats." That word, severe, isn't used lightly. Then it hit. The plane dropped hard, a gut punch of sudden weightlessness that stole everyone's breath. Gasps filled the cabin. The world outside was pitch black. We were flying blind into a violent pocket of air. In the galley, the beverage cart broke free, slamming into the bulkhead with a deafening crash. A bottle of red wine flew through the air, spinning, before exploding against the wall. The sharp crack of breaking glass echoed through the cabin. For a moment, it sounded like something far worse. Red splattered across the galley wall. Wine, not blood. But in that chaos, no one could tell the difference. The smell was sharp, sweet, and wrong. And on the floor lay a jagged piece of the bottle, a thick green neck with a sharp edge. Karen's eyes locked on it instantly. Her anger vanished, replaced by focus. The turbulence had handed her something she hadn't planned for, a weapon. The plane lurched again, more violently this time. Overhead bins rattled. People screamed. The fake medical emergency in the back was forgotten. Real fear had taken over. Leah, strapped into her jump seat, saw the same thing I did. Her face was pale, but her eyes were locked on that piece of glass. She knew what it meant. The ex-military man in 3D was braced and steady, his instincts alive. The nervous man was still in the lavatory. The entire cabin hung in suspended dread. That shard of glass was now the most dangerous thing on the plane. In tight quarters like this, even a crude blade can change everything. Karen's quiet plan had turned into open aggression. She wasn't trying to trick her way into control anymore. She was ready to fight for it. The plane dropped again. Lights flickered. For one terrifying second, we were plunged into darkness before the emergency lights kicked in, and in that brief flicker of blackness, she moved. She unbuckled. Her eyes glinted in the dim light. She was going for it. This wasn't about power anymore. It was about control and survival. The turbulence that frightened everyone else was her cover. No one could stop her. No one except me. This was why I was on this flight. The moment I'd trained for. The reason I was here. As she lunged for the glass, the lavatory door flew open. Her partner burst out, wild-eyed, drenched in sweat. He didn't return to his seat. He ran straight for the cockpit, hammering his fists against the reinforced door. It didn't move. It never does. "Let us in," he shouted, panicked, desperate. At the same time, Karen grabbed the bottle's jagged neck, gripping it like a blade. The sharp edge caught the dim light. She screamed something incoherent and moved toward the cockpit. Passengers in the front rows shrank back, terrified. Leah, strapped in, could only watch, helpless. The situation had gone from tension to full-blown crisis. There was no time left for hesitation. I unbuckled and moved, using the turbulence to my advantage, launching myself into the aisle. In one motion, I landed between Karen and the cockpit door. She froze, startled. "Federal Air Marshal," I shouted, voice cutting through the chaos. "Drop the weapon." I flashed my credentials high enough for Leah and the front rows to see. Karen's eyes went wide. This wasn't part of her script. I needed control of the cabin behind me. I locked eyes with the man in 3D. "You," I barked. "Block the aisle." Nobody moves. He didn't question it, just stood solid as a wall. The nervous man was still pounding on the door, screaming. Karen turned back to me, her voice shaking with fury. "You're nobody. Get out of my way." She lunged, not for me, but for the cockpit. I stepped in, deflecting her arm. My hand clamped around her wrist, pressing against the nerve cluster. Pain shot through her arm. Her grip faltered. "Drop it," I said, calm and steady. She fought, but it was useless. I twisted her wrist just enough to break her stance. The glass slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor. I kicked it under a seat out of reach. Leah tossed me a bio bag and I scooped up the shard, sealing it inside. Crisis contained for now. Evidence travels better than rumors. "On your knees," I ordered, pressing harder. She had no choice. Karen sank to the floor, trembling, a soft whimper escaping her lips. The whole exchange took less than 3 seconds. With her restrained, my focus shifted to her partner, still hammering at the cockpit door. "Sir, get on the ground now," I commanded. He turned, saw Karen pinned beneath my control, and the fight drained out of him. He wasn't a leader, never had been. Without her feeding his confidence, he was just a frightened man drenched in sweat. He slid down the door, hands behind his head, sobbing. The immediate threat was over. Now came the hard part, reestablishing control. Back in row 28, the medical emergency miraculously ended the moment the aisle cleared. Their performance was finished. I pulled a pair of soft flex cuffs from my pocket. "Leah," I called. "Cuffs." She was already unbuckled. The worst of the turbulence behind us. Following protocol, she had waited for the release call before moving. Smart, professional, steady. She grabbed another set from the emergency kit and rushed to help. I secured Karen's wrists tightly behind her back, plastic biting down with a satisfying snap. Leah mirrored me, cuffing the man beside the cockpit door. He didn't resist. Now they were both restrained, but I couldn't leave them lying in the aisle. I hauled Karen up. "We're moving," I said, steering her toward the first row. I pushed her into the window seat, farthest from the aisle. Looping the seat belt through her cuffs and around her waist, I cinched it tight, a quick field restraint turning the seat itself into part of the containment system. She couldn't stand. She couldn't reach anyone. She was secure. Her mouth still worked, though. "You're finished. I'll destroy your career live." I nodded toward the camera on her tray. "Low battery," I said flatly. "Like your plan." Leah and Marcus, still standing guard like a wall, helped me seat her partner beside her. We used the same seatbelt method to secure him, side by side, both restrained, controlled. The operation was fast, quiet, and professional. Passengers stared in shock, some wide-eyed, others visibly relieved. A man in a business suit raised his hand. "So in refunds?" Leah didn't miss a beat. Sir, we're giving you life, he nodded. Fair. A kid in 4A gave me a thumbs up. 10 out of 10 wrist twist. His mother winced. We don't rate wrist twists, I said, then paused. 10 out of 10 safe landings. That's the only rating I care about. A ripple of nervous laughter broke the tension. The threat was contained. Order restored. I stood in the aisle, breathing hard, heart pounding but steady. A quick scan confirmed it. No one hurt, crew safe, cockpit secure. I grabbed the intercom. This is the onboard Federal Air Marshal. The situation is under control. Please stay seated with your belts fastened. The flight crew is safe. We'll be on the ground shortly. I met Leah's eyes. She nodded, shaky but composed. Marcus still stood guard. I gave him a grateful nod. You can stand down. Thank you. A nervous passenger from 1D spoke up. Marshal, should we keep our shoes on? Yes, I said. In case the floor tries to steal them. Laughter rippled again, small, brave, human. Order returned like sunlight after a storm. Leah passed through with trash bags collecting debris. She mouthed, thank you. Marcus sat down at last, the quiet hero of the flight. I owe you a beer, he murmured. Make it 2, I said. Government salary, he grinned. Deal. As the adrenaline faded, bone-deep exhaustion set in. The physical part was over. Now came the hardest 20 minutes of my career, getting everyone safely on the ground. I used the flight deck phone in the galley, punching in the emergency code. The captain answered instantly, voice tense. What's your status? This is Marshal Monk, I said. 2 subjects attempted to breach the flight deck. Both are restrained and secured in seats 1A and 1C. Cabin secure. No injuries. Weapon neutralized, he exhaled audibly. Copy that, Marshal. Excellent work. We're declaring an emergency and requesting priority landing in Denver. 20 minutes to ground. Authorities will meet us at the gate. Prepare for rapid descent. Copied, I replied, hanging up. Denver Center cleared us direct. The captain owned the sky. I owned the cabin. I turned to Leah. We're descending fast. Prep the cabin, total compliance. No exceptions. She nodded, her fear replaced by focused precision. She relayed the command to the crew over intercom. Moments later, the nose pitched down sharply. Engines dropped to a low whine. The descent had begun. Passengers murmured anxiously. This didn't feel like a normal approach. I grabbed the PA mic. My voice had to be the calmest thing they'd ever hear. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Federal Air Marshal again. We've begun our emergency descent into Denver. This is a standard emergency descent. Pilots in full control. Stay seated. Seatbelts tight. Eyes on the crew. I repeated the message twice. I needed their focus. My voice over fear. Leah and her team moved through the cabin like clockwork, checking belts, locking carts, securing every loose item. Their professionalism was flawless, a thin, brave line between panic and order. I stood tall in the forward aisle, visible and steady, a symbol of control. A hand shot up. Sir, should we pray? If it helps you, yes, I said. But tighten that belt too. Another voice. Are we going to die? Not on my shift, I said firmly. Row 5, can I text my mom? Airplane mode and tell her you love her when we land. Row 2. Are snacks still coming? If you behave, Leah said, gliding by like a general. Laughter rolled through the cabin again. Small, human, necessary. Then Karen's voice cut through it, spewing curses and threats about lawyers and millions of followers. She was clawing for chaos, trying to steal back control. I walked to her seat, leaned close. My voice was calm, flat, cold. If you say one more word before we land, I'll add interfering with the crew and assaulting a federal officer to your charges. That's 20 more years. Your choice. Her mouth snapped shut. Hatred burned in her eyes, but she stayed silent. The threat of real consequences finally broke through her arrogance. The city lights of Denver appeared below, like scattered diamonds across the dark. The landing was firm, controlled, perfect. The roar of the reverse thrusters was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. We rolled to an isolated gate where a sea of flashing red and blue lights waited. The engines wound down to silence. We were safe. The flight from hell was over. When the main door opened, law enforcement flooded in, FBI agents and local officers in tactical gear. They moved with quiet precision, calm and commanding. 2 approached me. I showed my credentials. Marshal Monk. Subjects restrained in 1A and 1C. The lead agent nodded. Good work, Marshal. We'll take it from here. They replaced my cuffs with steel ones. One agent eyed my hoodie. Dress code camouflage, I said. For Karen's sake, he didn't laugh. Agents rarely do. I took the win anyway. Karen said nothing, her face pale and blank. Reality had finally caught her. Her empire of ego was collapsing. As the agents led her and her partner down the aisle, passengers watched in stunned silence. They were witnesses to a story they'd tell for decades. As she passed, Karen met my eyes again, her voice a low hiss. You have no idea who you've just messed with. I'll ruin you. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't flinch. People like me, I said evenly, are the only reason people like you get to land safely. Her face broke. For the first time, she had no comeback. No power left. And that silence was the most satisfying sound of all. The agents guided her gently forward and onto the jet bridge. I watched them go, then turned back to the cabin. My job was nearly done. I stayed on board while the passengers deplaned, giving a calm, factual statement to another agent. No emotion, just the truth. The elderly couple from the gate paused on their way out. Cleaner than her soul, the woman whispered with a knowing smile. The kid from 4A stopped too, pressing a small pirate sticker into my hand. It's a badge, he said proudly. Temporary, I told him. Like fame, his mother added. We all nodded, sharing a strange, unspoken understanding. Before I left, I made sure to commend Leah and her crew, and to name Marcus as a civilian who'd provided invaluable assistance. They deserved every bit of recognition. When the cabin was finally empty, I sat down at last. The adrenaline had burned away hours ago, leaving only the familiar ache of exhaustion. Another flight, another box checked. My phone buzzed. A text from Dave. Landed yet? How was the flight? I stared at the message for a long moment. I could have written, you won't believe what just happened, or just stopped a hijacking. But that wasn't me. That wasn't the job. The job is to be invisible. The gray man no one remembers when they walk off the plane. So I typed back, landed uneventful. 3 dots pulsed. Then, proud of you, man. I smiled and replied, you say that to all your students. Only the ones who do their homework, he sent back. Fair. A week later, I was sitting in another terminal, waiting for another flight, when her face flashed across a news screen. The headline wasn't about her heroic stand against a so-called oppressive airline. It was about her arrest, her federal charges, and the decades in prison she was now facing. Her live stream, once her weapon, had become Exhibit A for the prosecution. Every word, every threat, every coordinated move with her partner had been captured, time-stamped, and archived. Fame cuts both ways. Her own followers, horrified by what they'd seen, turned against her. The internet flooded with clips of her meltdown. The airline revoked her elite status, banned her from all future flights, and flagged her file. Do not upgrade. Do not serve alcohol. Do not engage. All 3 boxes checked. Poetry in administrative form. In her pursuit of attention, she achieved something far greater and far uglier than fame. She had proved not how powerful she was, but how fragile her world really had been. My phone buzzed again. A message from an internal security bulletin, a quiet detail that made me smile. The FAA had levied the maximum civil penalty against her, a fine so large it would likely ruin her financially. She had set out to punish the airline. Instead, she'd destroyed herself. I slipped my phone away, pulled up my hoodie, and leaned back in my seat, ready for the next flight. The world will always have people who believe the rules don't apply to them, and it will always need quiet, tired people like me, making sure they do.